Our principal speaker today, Eugenio Elorduy, has played a key role in the political transformation of Baja California over the past 2 decades. He is a longtime activist in the PAN at the local, state, and national levels, having served in a succession of increasingly important elective and appointed posts, including mayor of the city of Mexicali, member of the PAN's National Executive Council, and beginning next month, with his inauguration on November 1st, as governor of the state of Baja California. After Governor-elect Elorduy's remarks, I will introduce today's commentator. Eugenio, welcome back to the Center for U.S.-Mexican Studies.
Good afternoon to all of you here, and thank you very much for being present. I appreciate your kindness and being part of this important event for the university. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Wayne Cornelius, good, long-standing friend, and all of you, the friends at the center, for having me invited to be here present with you. I also want to thank Professor Shirk, and I'm sorry we're missing Professor Ward, also a close friend, but these airline situations unfortunately obligated him to cancel his trip. I will follow some of the questions that the organizers kindly sent me as topics that may result of interest to you. The first one was, which were the keys for the development of PAN as a political party in Baja California? The National Action Party, PAN, was founded in 1939 by an exceptional group of Mexicans headed by Manuel Gómez Morín. Since its foundation, PAN underlined a program of action based on the first key to success, perseverance. Gómez Morín and the rest of PAN's founders were convinced that their fight was not going to be an easy one, and that to reach a true democracy in Mexico, they had to persevere in their effort. They wanted to generate a great spirit of civic consciousness about the basic political rights of Mexicans. They wanted to promote public policies to dignify both the people and the whole political system through the creation of a political party that could be an honest option to Mexico's anti-democratic ruling system. Speaking now about Baja California, we have to acknowledge first that being a state of immigrants from all over Mexico, it is understood that people arrived here with the goal of improving their lives. I am sure that most of them, in a way or another, were not happy with the governments of the states from which they came. One of the keys to success was that renowned citizens of different socio-economic conditions took the challenge of being PAN's candidates during very hard times. We obtained memorable electoral victories that were never recognized by the system and its corrupt so-called authorities. It was a norm for them not to respect the people's will. However, they justified their acts by calling it revolutionary fraud. We never let our guard down. Somehow, and despite our sadness and anger at witnessing fraud after fraud, we always had candidates that gave, in a lot of cases, all they had just to keep alive the fight for democracy. It did not matter that the government fixed the rules, we were always there. Sometimes it was very difficult to find candidates because they knew about the attacks that they would suffer on themselves, their families, and their employments. They told us that we were crazy or daydreamers, or that we thought that this was some kind of a game. But election after election, the civic consciousness was growing bigger. Another key element is the organization and internal democracy that only PAN has among political parties in Mexico. We have a list of registered members that have to demonstrate through a whole year that they really want to be members of our party and participate that way in our conventions to elect candidates. And I can tell you that sometimes it's more difficult to win an internal PAN convention than the general election. But our democracy is not limited to conventions and internal elections. Every party member is free to express him or herself through our assemblies and conventions. We have strong discussions, and I am convinced that this is the only way to take the best decisions in benefit of everyone. One of the reasons for people to join PAN is because they want to transcend and not just watch everything that happens in Mexico pass by. We all want to be a part of the continuous effort to improve our country. An important element is also the organization that PAN members, along with common citizens, have always had to personally take care of the whole electoral process. This was especially important during hard times, not so long ago, when it was common practice that the ballots were stolen before our eyes. About this topic, it is important to state that once PAN won the state government in 1989 in Baja California, we promoted the creation of a local electoral council to handle the electoral process. Today, Baja California's Electoral Institute is run by renowned citizens elected by the state Congress and not by the governor, like it was before. There are no government officials anymore in any electoral council. Before, the government always had a majority. Another important reason why PAN has stayed in the preference of Baja Californians is, of course, its good record as a party in government. We have delivered a change in how to do things. We always guarantee respect for the will of people during electoral processes, and that reality and perception of honest government is clear. PAN governments are really close to the people. We listen to them and work with them to solve their problems. We have helped to create a climate of liberty and freedom like they had never experienced before. The Panistas have a very strong mystical motivation. We love Mexico and every single part of it. Our motto is for a stable and generous homeland and a better and more dignified life for everyone. Another topic that they mentioned, the organizers, was how did PAN manage to consolidate itself as a party on the municipal and state governments in Baja California? It is important to point out that everything is part of a process. Before PAN had mayors and governors, there was a first city council member and a first state Congress member. These people opened important doors and showed that we were serious on our goals and that with hard work, closeness to people, and results, things could really change in benefit of everyone. With perseverance and always presenting candidates, despite the common frauds, we started to have more votes, more council members, and more Congress members. Voters rapidly increased their trust for us, while on the other hand, the pre-government, city and statewide discredited themselves by their actions or lack of them. Both these factors made us the best option for government. Nowadays, we're consolidated in government because we have generated a strong political culture among citizens. People in Baja California are today, more than ever, very critical and participate actively with their government. They want and demand concrete results for their problems and necessities. They know that the most important weapon, the vote, is in their hands to change the government whenever they are not satisfied with the results they see. In fact, when we have not produced these results, people have voted for another party in city elections. We have examples like Ensenada and Tecate. I think that another reason is that PAN's elected office holders are worried about the future of their cities and their state, with a strong vocation for service and a high sense of responsibility for their public jobs. Another fact that voters evaluate day after day are the public works that they see every day when they come out of their houses. PAN governments, through professional planning and listening to the people, make only the public works that benefit most of the population, and the citizens are happy to participate in these projects. This generates and strengthens trust, respect, and opportunities for everyone to live better. An interesting fact is that the new generations of young voters are also trusting PAN, even though most of them did not witness the history of electoral processes before. They perceive new, clean institutions, and they enjoy living in an open society with absolute freedom of speech. They can criticize, they can form new associations, and they can also be responsible for public policies along with city and state governments. I am convinced that people give their vote to PAN candidates because they see the progress and economic development where they live. But most importantly, they want government to be very close to them, and PAN governments do that very well. Another question is, what is the difference between the PAN of Baja California and the PAN of other states where it has won elections? Basically, the mission of PAN in the whole country is the same, and so the results should be the same. However, the approaches to achieve that mission are different, and so the results differ from one state to another. We cannot let out the fact that the voters are also different in Mexico. Their needs are different, their ways of life are different, and so their electoral preferences are different. However, in the states and cities where PAN has won repeatedly, a common factor is that most of the time the population is comprised of young age groups that has more education and less poverty. So I think that there is really no difference between the PAN as a party in every state where we win or lose. The difference is between individuals and human beings and the ways of doing things. It is important to note that the National Executive Committee of PAN is always studying every single electoral process in the country, trying to identify those specific realities in every place. Their objective is to provide new and innovative ways to approach the voters according to their reality, but always bringing the same principles and mission of PAN. Is there a PAN Baja California model that the PRI or PRD could copy? Well, first of all, I think it would be interesting to ask them this question to these other parties. However, I do not believe that in politics there is a specific model to follow. To win electoral processes, there are a lot of situations and circumstances that have to be analyzed altogether. I am also convinced that any political party that seriously wants to participate in the game of democracy has to practice that democracy internally so that they can choose better men and women to represent them before the voters. If I have to speak of a model for a party to win elections, I think that first of all, this would be to have a very well-organized institution with registered members, with obligations and duties, with transparent rules, a strong internal democracy, and being self-sustainable economically. PAN has always been focused to bring the voters well-organized electoral campaigns with unity and respect among candidates. There has to be a clear direction that optimizes the use of resources, and it is also important to avoid the existence of several generals, so to speak, who only pretend to give orders everywhere. Political parties like PAN have to remain close to the population, serving as a bridge between them and their government. It does not matter what party people like or what party is in government. PAN has to be close to the citizens. This makes me remember a phrase mentioned not too long ago by Felipe Calderón, former national president of PAN, who said, "We have to win the government without losing the party." Another question that I have here is, as a party that has governed Baja California for 12 years, how can PAN avoid the problems that historically became a symbol of PRI? I think that neither PAN nor any political party or government in the world is immune to having problems like corruption and decrease of values like it happened to PRI. Carlos Castillo Peraza, another former president, now deceased, expressed, "Panistas have to be very careful of that little priista that exists inside all of us." In fact, if a panista does not fulfill his responsibility in government, he will never get a second chance. However, PAN believes and makes a great effort to permeate its universal values of respect and ethics to all our members. Our moral strength as a serious political party is based on electoral compromises fulfilled with results, and by conducting itself with modesty and simplicity. The fight against corruption is constant, and every panista must be congruent between what is said and what is done. Another difference is that PAN has worked since its foundation to consolidate the institutions of government. One of our goals is that citizens can fully respect the laws at all levels and trust the established institutions at their service. There must be only the minimum needed government for all, but there must be only the minimum needed government, but all the social participation that could be possible. PAN is not only not afraid, but it strongly promotes that the citizens participate with the governments, and we also encourage them to tell us our mistakes and where we are failing our compromises. The media plays a very important role here because, I should say instead of compromises, commitments, I correct myself. The media plays a very important role here because they help us to bring the voice of the people to the government and vice versa. Obviously, that as true Democrats, we are convinced of the possibility of alternates. However, we do not think that it should come as a decree if a political party spends a number of years in government. No, it should come just when the voters decide that some other political option deserves an opportunity to try to make things better. Another question that I have here is, how the relationship between the state government in the federal government is going to change now that PAN is in office at both levels? I think that the answer is very simple and lays on the very constitution of our country, living by and applying an authentic federalistic system. First of all, we must stop thinking about levels of government and think instead about orders of government. For instance, the municipalities have to be recognized as the basic cells of our society where families and neighbors interact with each other. These must administer all the basic services to the community. States have to be truly free and with sovereignty, interacting with a strong and respectable federal government, which is in charge of coordinating the efforts of the three orders of government for the benefit of all the citizens. In fact, Mexico's President Vicente Fox is acting accordingly to this proposal, and part of his plan is to cut most of the federal delegations in the states. PAN has historically fought to obtain an authentic federal system in Mexico. I think this is a very interesting challenge for the federal, the state, and the municipal governments currently. Another question that I have here is what institutional changes, not just adjustments, are required in Mexico to have a better distribution of federal income taxes? President Fox has sent to the Mexican Congress a proposal for a complete fiscal reform. The spirit of this reform is that at the end of the day, everyone can pay taxes according to their incomes in a simple and fair way. With this reform, it will be possible to minimize tax evasion, obtain more resources to fight poverty, improve the quality of life, expanding the public services, and diminishing the country's debt. People will gladly agree to pay taxes if their productivity increases. For that to happen, we need to reorganize the agricultural activities, solve the land problems, and open more accessible credits for individuals. Of course, the size of government has to be optimized, especially in non-priority areas. Also, a strict discipline in public spending and the promotion of internal savings is absolutely important. The reform of the state initiatives must be approved soon by Congress. Some of these initiatives refer to the energy sector, for example, the banking system, and also the fiscal coordination and distribution of income of taxes collected by the federal government right now. Some public services will have to be privatized if needed, and more support for export industry will have to be provided. All this, along with our oil exports, can increase the government's ability to spend more in benefit of those who have less. Pemex currently turns over all its profits to the Mexican Federal Treasury after investments. This should change so that Pemex, for example, will be treated as a company that pays taxes but has the possibility that the revenue left over can be used for education, for example. Now, once the federal government reduces its size and transfers functions to the states, this will also help to transform the actual formula that leaves 80% of tax income for the federal government and just 20% for states and municipalities. This will have to be modified gradually until we have a proportion of 50% for the federal government and 50% for the states and municipalities at the very least. I think that the essence of the federal income system is to stimulate a situation of productivity related to the income of taxes. These, I think, are some of the deep changes that have to happen in Mexico to reach a fair distribution system and promote growth. It says here also, tell us a little bit about your personal experience as an opposition member in Mexico, and how does the experience relate to your experience specifically in Baja California? Well, I've been a member of PAN since 1968. I'm a businessman, transitionally in politics, and I have a deep sense of commitment that to change things, obviously, in your country, you have to get involved. And, well, I got involved when I just gotten out of college a few years after that, and when it was not the most sensible and more intelligent thing for a businessman to go into PAN. Some businessman some time ago this year asked me how long I had been in PAN, and I told him approximately 14 federal audits. So that's how things were measured in the old Mexico. My experience has always been very gratifying. I would not change my life and how I did it. And I think that the results were always in my head. I don't want to be presumptuous, but I told my father, who got very, very mad at me, when I told him that I had gone into PAN. He didn't speak to me for about 6 months. But I told him after we got together again, because the only person that could speak to me was, even my wife was very mad, was my mother. And I told him that we would win the city government of Mexicali, the state government, and the presidency of Mexico. And PAN has done all those three things. So why? Because it was, in my sense and my vision, it was logical if you respect what people desire in an election. And I knew what was happening to our country, how it was being internally destroyed by very personal presidential decisions which caused so much damage from which we have not recovered. That these changes were coming and would bring us these results like we had July 2nd of last year with Mr. Fox winning the presidency. Again, I have now the opportunity to be the governor of my state, and obviously I have a very big responsibility. And people have told me that there are high hopes, which makes it a much more bigger responsibility. It'll be 6 very, very, very tough but very interesting years. And after these times when you go into these public service, myself and I've told the people that I've invited to collaborate with us that we should only look for one thing after this, is to gain the respect of the people. I think if we do that and if we obtain the respect of people, it means that we more or less did what we have to and must do. So I don't want to spend too much time on myself, but just want to maybe in a later question I can expand a little bit more with some anecdotes of my life with Mexican presidents like Mr. Salinas and Mr. Cedillo. I remember one, if I can just have a little few minutes. As mayor of Mexicali, whoever knows Mexicali knows that we have a very serious problem with electrical rates for our houses. Very, very high. People that make 3 or 4 minimum wages, salary, as that's the way we measure them, 3 or 4 daily wages increase to the month. They spend sometimes 40 to 50% of their income in paying their electricity in their houses. This is very, very unjust. And we have differences where in other places of Mexico this does not happen. So, well, the first thing that I told Mr. Cedillo when I welcomed him to Mexicali on the 22nd of December of 1995, when he came to visit for the first time Baja California as president, he was not too happy with Mr. Rufo. That's why he didn't come before. So when Mr. Rufo left and Mr. Terán, may he rest in peace, came into government on November 1st, 95, well, Mr. Cedillo came 50 days after that. And the first thing I said in my message there in the Civic Center of Mexicali, I told him, please, Mr. President, the people of Mexicali are waiting for you to comply, to fulfill your commitment for a special electricity rate. He did not like that. And it was a topic that came up and in different circumstances until one time in his presidential bus, he slammed his hand on the table and he told me that, please, you do not have to bring this topic up to me. And I told him, you should not lose your temper and you should respect me because I come from the same ballot box from where you came. We are the same. You are not more important than I or the governor. So you must always treat us with respect and with dignity because that's the way we treat you. And this topic will always be in the forefront of my petitions to you because it's the people that we're worried about. It's not how you feel about these things. So those are some of the anecdotes that I have. But again, a question here, what are your thoughts about re-election in Mexico and how can they be accomplished? Well, first, it is important to state that in Mexico right now, we are experiencing a true process of transition to a full democracy. A lot of paradigms and traditions which were considered untouchable in political terms are starting to change. One of those is the re-election of political offices. I think the conditions are not fully developed in Mexico to accept re-election at all levels without restrictions. I think that first it should be rehearsed, so to speak, by allowing only one re-election of 3-year term offices, that is, mayors, state, and federal congressmen. This could work because these offices are closer to the people and voters could better evaluate them. By now, I would like to exclude the re-election of 6-year term offices like governors, senators, and the president. To allow re-election in Mexico, the Constitution of the nation has to be modified with 2/3 of the votes of the federal congressmen. After that, 17 of the 32 local legislatures have also to pass that reform. By the way, right now, the re-election topic is being deeply studied as it is an important part of the reform of the state discussions at the federal and state levels. Another question that I have here, which have been the success stories in the cooperation between California and Baja California and their cities, and how can that relationship improve? Today, we can see some of the results in how we have been able to open new border crossings and to improve the conditions of the ones already open. Even after the tragic events of September 11th, right now, the waiting times for inspections at the border have been getting better, I hope. That's what I've gone through at least. And have almost reached some of the times that we had previously. Obviously, security has been tightened, but the times are coming normal again because both customs departments are cooperating in the inspection northbound and southbound with more agents. When I was mayor of Mexicali, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the Imperial County Board of Supervisors. Together with the authorities of the EPA, California, and the Imperial County, we reached an agreement to clean up the new river in Mexicali and Imperial with financial resources from both countries. This project is currently underway, and the benefits of it are already being felt in both countries. Also, I had the opportunity as mayor to sign an agreement with the Quechan Tribal Council in the Algodones Andrade area for the future relocation of the port of entry over there. I think that we are going to see in the near future the results of several years of cooperation and joint planning with the development of new border crossings in the west of San Isidro, the east of Otay, Jacumba, and on the new river in Mexicali. Another important common topics are water and energy, in fact. As we speak, 2 energy plants of American companies are being built in Mexicali. This will ensure the provision of energy for the whole region, not only our region, but also California for years to come. Not only 2 are being constructed and 3 are being thought to present their request for authorization to operate in Mexicali, 3 more electrical plants, for example. About the water issue, there are some interesting projects being studied right now to bring more water to the coast from the Colorado River. One of these projects includes the proposal of a binational aqueduct. On February, we are going to witness the reinstallation of the Commission of the Californias. With this, the governors of California, Baja California, and Baja California Sur are going to strengthen relations and commit themselves to work together, bringing benefits for their citizens. Besides of these big projects, we have seen great cooperation efforts in areas like culture, ecology, sports, and education, and also prevention and handling of disasters and fires. Myself have been a member of the San Diego Dialogue and currently co-chairman of the Forum Fronterizo, where we have been dealing precisely with these topics like energy, water, the binational crossing on the border, and some other topics relating to the integration of the whole region, San Diego County, Imperial, and the state of Baja California. Of course, there are still important issues that we still have to resolve, cooperating together like the treatment of illegal immigrants, drug production and consumption, transportation, and some pollution problems on both sides of the border. Nevertheless, I am sure that we are going to work out these and other problems because we are good neighbors, and most importantly, our relationship is strongly founded on trust. Around public safety, which is another topic, and I think I'm running out of time, Wayne, I would just like to say that on public safety, which we could speak about more a little bit later, the main axis of our proposal is prevention, and obviously this will imply proposals to the state legislature in the next few days before I take office to reorganize the Attorney General's office in Baja, and also to reorganize and create a new public safety secretariat, which will take care of these prevention responsibilities and have only the Attorney General do the investigation of complaints placed by offended people. With the actual economic situation, we must help each other, see it as a challenge for our imagination, and do all we can to work to solve it together with enthusiasm and optimism. These were some of the ideas that I want to implement once I take office as governor of Baja California on November 1st. I want you to honestly know that the people of Baja California are all your friends, starting with myself. Trust is the basis for working together. We are gratified that Presidents Bush and Fox have this trust between them. I am sure that good and exciting times are coming very soon for all of us. And just for some of the some of the programs that will be currently put by the Mexican federal government, which will be probably communicated in the next few days, are precisely because of this current economic situation. In fact, one of them was announced today. The Mexican government will supply approximately, I don't know how many millions of dollars to the Mexican airlines, which are also going through a very severe crisis like the ones here in your country. Again, I want to thank you very much for listening to what I have just spoken to you, and I am at your service if you have any questions. And again, thank you very much, Wayne. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor-elect Elorduy. Now for some expert comments from David Shirk, a member of the founding faculty of the newly opened SoCa University of America, who has written extensively on the development of the PAN in Baja California, Guanajuato, and other parts of Mexico. David?
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Governor Elorduy, Governor-elect. The PAN has obviously received a lot more attention in recent years than it did during the 71 years of pre-governance at the national level and virtual hegemony at all levels. So I think it's appropriate to expand somewhat on Governor-elect Elorduy's assessment of what exactly is the PAN. Where does it come from? What does it stand for? Especially because for so long, the conventional wisdom about the PAN was very much, I think, misconstrued, partly by official regime sources, partly by the fears and misconceptions of the enemies or opposition to the PAN. I think that conventional wisdom, or that general assessment of what the PAN stood for a very long time, was one of a party that was essentially economically conservative, socially and morally conservative, and essentially the vestiges of a counter-revolutionary force in Mexico. That essentially the PAN represented the reaction to the Mexican Revolution of 1910. And to some extent, we can see this conventional wisdom reinforced in some cases by the actions that we've seen by PAN governments at the state and local levels. There have been widely publicized descriptions of PAN governments banning miniskirts and other forms of dress in their administrations. There have been accusations and instances of censorship in places like Aguascalientes. The miniskirts incident occurred in Guadalajara. And in the states of Baja California and León, we have also seen criticisms of the PAN for its position on abortion. It is, as a conservative party, primarily, or a party with important links to the Catholic Party in its historical development. It is a pro-choice party, primarily, or pro-life. Did I say pro-choice? And has been criticized for these things. On the other hand, we can look at the PAN's philosophy and behavior over the last 60-some years and see that the party has actually been quite different from that conventional viewpoint. The idea that the PAN is an economically conservative party can be offset by PAN philosophies of humanism, the idea that we should help those in our those who are the less fortunate members of our society by teaching them to help themselves. It was sort of the development of a philosophy that differed greatly from the PRI's paternalistic policies of simply giving to those who had need or buying votes with a taco or a torta here and there. This idea of humanism in many ways assimilates the concept that we have heard in the United States of a sort of compassionate conservatism, helping others to help themselves. And with respect to the pan-social conservatism, it's moralism, it's machismo, it's links to the Catholic Church. We also find that there are some holes in the presentation of the party in that sense. The story that Guadalajara's mayor had banned miniskirts and imposed at the same time a toque de queda, essentially a curfew, were actually misreported in the national media. And part of the national misconception, what evidently occurred was that a member of the staff of a secretary within the local government was dressed by her boss's opinion inappropriately and was asked to change her attire. That story got misconstrued and blown up in the national media. And she was not wearing a miniskirt. She was wearing a blouse that her administrator felt was inappropriate. The same thing has happened to the PAN to some extent in other areas. So I think one of the things that is a dilemma for the PAN, and one of the things that I think certainly Governor Elorduy will have to deal with once he is instated, is this sort of duality between the PAN's perceived political beliefs and sort of the perception of the PAN as an arch-conservative force, and whatever the PAN believes to be the reality of itself. Certainly, as Governor-elect Elorduy has discussed quite extensively, the PAN has been quite unusual among conservative forces in Latin America. As far as I can tell, and as far as I know, it is the only essentially liberal democratic party advocating the views of the right in Latin America. If we look to the cases of Chile, Argentina, Peru, we certainly see a much less democratic party, a party that has not advocated to the degree or extent or the length of time that the PAN has advocated human rights, freedom of expression, and other democratic values. And secondly, in terms of how the PAN has progressed, both nationally and locally, I think one of the most important things that stands out about the PAN is its organizational integrity. The PAN has observed a scrupulous, and sometimes painfully scrupulous, internal democracy, and has worked very hard for a great deal of institutional preservation. There's an internal respect for procedure and the rule of law in the PAN that is quite remarkable and has allowed it to endure for so long. Now that the party is in government, the rigidity of internal structures within the PAN have proved at times to be a constraint, have proved to be a disadvantage even in some cases for its candidates. When President Fox ran for the nomination, most of the party's leaders were largely opposed to his participation as the party's national candidate. The members of the Sen had ideological reasons to oppose him, and eventually he was forced to go outside the party, essentially circumventing the party by forming his own political action committee known as Amigos de Fox, or Friends of Fox, as a means of almost hijacking the vote within the party. This kind of maneuvering within an organization looks very similar to the kinds of things we've seen in the United States. We could call this a sort of Americanization of party politics in Mexico. The use of political action committees, the use of extensive funding to have brilliant, highly beautiful Technicolor ads that are dazzling and wonderful, short, easy to understand slogans like "Ya," today, or tomorrow, hoy. These kinds of things have become, as in the United States, substituted for substantive policy discussions of the kind that the PAN formerly advocated. I think that these are things that the PAN needs to be wary of, and that Governor Elordi might be interested in discussing in further detail. And I think that in terms of the party's progress in Baja California, in many ways, Governor-elect Elordi has been too modest. The risks and challenges to members of the opposition in Mexico should not be taken lightly or thought of as lightly. Certainly the PRD has gotten, in the last 10 years, a very swift introduction and experience of authoritarianism under the PRI. The 60 or so years during which the PAN languished in the authoritarian or semi-authoritarian regime of the PRI was taught to the PRD in sort of a crash course. Many PRDistas were killed. Many of them were persecuted, followed, bothered, and so forth. And certainly that kind of thing was experienced here in Baja California. 1958, 1969 elections in Baja California were essentially stolen. One of their top candidates in that election, Salvador Rosas Magallon, was actually driven into the United States in hiding to survive that persecution. I think that we need to recognize that the PAN did, in fact, endure quite a bit of struggle. On the other hand, I think it's also important to recognize that the PAN would not be where it is today if it had not been for the decline of the PRI. For the excesses of power that ultimately undermined the PRI. The PAN has not been as successful in places where the PRI's machine, the PRI's institutions were strong. And indeed, even in Baja California, the PAN was not the first party to govern at the local level. Rather, it was a dissident PRI faction that broke away under the PSUM initially, but then they eventually went right back to the PRI within a year after winning the government in Ensenada. So political alternation occurred initially in Baja California as a result of essentially pre-divisions and decline, I would argue. And that raises a serious concern for the PAN, because for many of the party's critics, the PAN is not necessarily the best option for Mexico, but the only option in the wake of a divided and decayed PRI. So I think a serious question that the PAN needs to ask itself is what it can do to renew its commitment to democracy and public policy. Can it move beyond simply good government as a political objective now that the PRI is gone, or at least out of power at the national level? In terms of some of the changes that need to be made, Governor Elordi mentioned some of the economic changes, such as privatization. Obviously, these are very sensitive issues in Mexico, which has traditionally emphasized a certain national pride in industries that are historically important to it. I think a more important and pressing issue for especially the Fox government and these early governments in Mexico's hopefully continuing period of political alternation and democracy is the issue of accountability. Essentially at the national level, we are seeing a rewriting of the rules of the game. And the most important lacking element of the Mexican political system for the last nearly 100 years, if not for all time, has been a degree of accountability. And Baja California is currently considering important changes as well as at the national level. But I think in terms of taking advantage of having Governor-elect Elordi here, it is important perhaps to discuss some of the political changes that are being considered, the municipal reform bills that are currently being considered in the legislature, such as the notion that local governments or the representatives to local governments should be elected by district rather than by a list. In other words, direct election of city council members in particular districts as a way of increasing the accountability at the local level, a kind of decentralization within the state. And so as not to go on too long, I would like to also ask Governor-elect Elorduy to consider some of the political changes that that should have probably occurred prior to 1998, when unfortunately the governor of Baja California passed unexpectedly. During that time, there were no regular procedures in place for the replacement of a sitting governor. Throughout Mexico's history, governors were replaced quite frequently, and this was achieved by direct action by the President of Mexico. The two presidents who replaced the most governors, of course, were Lázaro Cárdenas and Carlos Salinas, replacing dozens of governors within their terms. So there was never really a perceived need for establishing procedures within the state constitution to allow for some kind of vice governor to step up or for some extra procedures to select a governor. In the wake of that sort of political crisis for Baja California, I think it would be very interesting, at least for me, to find out how was that situation resolved and how will such situations be resolved in the future. There are a number of interesting policy issues I think that you've raised. You've talked about water, power, airports. I think especially here in San Diego, we're for the last 2 decades, we have been interested in the question of a binational airport. The most recent proposals for a binational airport were brought up in August. The notion is that the city of San Diego or the U.S. side of the border would be used as a facility for loading passengers, while the runways would all be located conveniently south of the border. And there would be an equitable profit-sharing arrangement for these facilities. Clearly, we're in a new regime at the moment in air travel with its own particular problems. But I'm curious where you stand on issues like that, what the state of Baja California will be doing to promote an integrated binational region in terms of transportation infrastructure, in terms of resolving the kinds of policy issues that you discussed, from narco-trafficking to even developing mechanisms of credit and finance in the region. That is more than I would want to address myself, so at this point I'm going to withdraw from the podium and allow Governor Elorduy to respond.
Thank you very much, David. I am going to invite Governor-elect Elorduy to take maybe 5 to 7 minutes to respond to a subset of David's questions and comments before we open it up.
Okay, Wayne, thanks a lot. Thank you, Professor Shirk. I think that your analysis is very well done, and I congratulate you. You are very up to date on what is happening over there. For example, some of the things that that Professor Shirk here commented. There are still in the legislative oven, as we say, the reforms for electing city councilmen by district, but it will come. We should be able to have this legislature passed and reforms made hopefully next year. We have sometimes, as I say, abused of democracy, because when I say abuse is that we talk and talk and talk and talk because it makes us feel that we participate, because if we talk a lot, we are doing a lot of things, but really it's just sometimes it's like skating for 8 hours but not moving from the same place. You don't do anything. What we want to do is really get these state reforms into the plenary sessions and get them approved, and we will see that happening. Definitely, we will continue to have more and more legislature and laws, as we might say, for accountability. People in Baja California are scrutinizing the candidates much more each time. We are having better candidates, not only for city councilmen, but for state legislatures and mayors, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that we are going along the way of getting people involved that way. Now, concerning PON itself, we are going through a reform of our statutes. There will be a National Council meeting on the 20th of this month where we will approve the proposal to be set up to consideration of our National Assembly on the 8th of December in the city of Querétaro. This will be a major reform of our statutes and our internal rules. And I think that definitely this is being done because of what you precisely were saying. We are in a very different national responsibility since specifically July 2nd of last year. And we must be ahead of the people so we will show them that we are very conscious of this tremendous political responsibility. Now, when my personal and dear friend Hector Terán passed away on the 4th of October, 1998, Sunday morning, there were provisions in Mexican constitutions, the federal and state constitutions. If a governor dies or leaves office with a previous congressional approval before the 2 years of his term is over, there has to be a new election. If that happens after the first 2 years, the state Congress elects by simple majority a new governor. What happened when Mr. Terán died, PAN had 11 congressmen, PRI had 11, and PRD had 3. They had just gone into office 3 days before, on the 1st of October of '98. So PAN could not, by itself, present a candidate and win the approval of the majority. They didn't have it. They lacked 2 members. We have now that majority, thank God. But before it was 11. So there had to be an agreement. And it was agreed that it would be a panista. And that's why Mr. Alejandro González Alcocer was elected that way, and by 24 votes in favor and 1 abstention of Mr. Jimenez Mercado from PRD. He belongs to the city of Ensenada. There was a small detail. There was a confusion because they said that people that were in elected office could not be chosen as candidates. There was a quibble about the verb, whether the state Congress elected or designated. And they opted for interpreting it as an election. So they applied the premise that you have to resign in Mexico the office that you have 90 days before the election to be able to be elected. But that's what they had to change really after Mr. González Alcocer was elected. The binational airport, I think it's a very good idea. We need to move forward on that. And yes, the runways are on the Tijuana side. I think we can work on that and get more infrastructure on that side and have a border crossing there. And obviously, I think we can come to an agreement. There is also obviously movements on the Otay region for using Brown Airport. Some people don't want it. I read in the San Diego Union a couple of days ago, they had a very intensive discussion. I don't know how it ended, but,
They voted against it.
They voted against it. Well, that means that, we started seeing that project, Wayne and friends, about 10 years ago. I was state treasurer with Mr. Rufo in that time, And I was working with Ron Roberts. He was a supervisor, I think he was, at that time, or city councilman. And we started to work on a binational airport, but in Mexico, the authorities were very squeamish about that, and they didn't move it. Sometimes we overprotect ourselves, you know, so I think that's probably what happened in the last few weeks. This will be something that we will move, and I have, Mr. Fox is very interested in this idea, and we will move on it. I think that the explanation that you gave, Professor Shirk, about what people say, really, yes, the media sometimes does its work. And because, well, media in Mexico has still not gotten over the fact that they have to be very professional, and they just can't do what money tells them. So since there's no money, then they want to get back at the people that are not supplying the money anymore, which are the governments that we head. So that gives them the liberty of sometimes emphasizing things. But again, that's part of our transition, and we have to take it in stride, and we have to smile and be very nice and never lose your temper. In this job, that's the worst thing that you can do. You have to smile at your worst enemy, because again, you have to fortify democracy by always being sure that you're going on the right direction. And if some people say that you're out of sync because an editorial or a newspaper man or whatever, you have to listen to them and smile at them and continue on your way. I think that's one of the things that have to be done. Some of our PAN members don't do that very well, and they lose their temper, and they get then they have for the rest of their lives certain qualifications made of them. So I think that more or less that would be my 5-7 minutes. I hope it wasn't more. Thank you.
We thank both the governor and David Shirk for being so succinct, which leaves us with nearly an hour for questions and answers. I'm going to ask each of you who would like to ask a question or make a comment to come to the microphone so that we can get it on tape. Everyone, at least for the first vuelta, is limited to a single question. So please take advantage of the floor.
Well, thank you, Governor. It's a pleasure to hear the presentation and the exchange. As you know better than most, Baja California is a border state and is intimately influenced by its relationship with California and the United States. And I wonder if you could tell us how you see the political relations at the local, the state, and the federal level. Most cross-border things are, by their nature, federal. So many of the things we've discussed, border crossings, drugs, crime, commercial relations, binational airports, many of the problems and opportunities that Baja California faces would be properly considered federal. So could you describe the relationship with the federal government on local issues, and then also with the border cities, your major cities that are right across the border from the United States?
Thank you. Well, first on our side of the border, the relationship with the federal government before this current government was difficult in safety issues, which is what you were talking about: drugs, national security, et cetera, et cetera. The problem was that there was no truthful flow of information from the federal level to us, and we were left out in the cold. I went through situations like that when I was a part of Mr. Rufo's government, and the only time really that we had some good flow of information was when Mr. Jorge Carpizo was Attorney General during Mr. Salinas' government. That was not too long he went to Gobernación after that, but that was what I felt a real special time. Currently, things have been changing. When I have visited the president twice since I was elected, I just had a meeting with him on Friday of last week, and we are in agreement because I put up right away that as he had been very firm as governor of Guanajuato, I was coming and to express to him the same things, exactly the same concepts that he had expressed to Mr. Cedillo, that we must work in trust and that I must know what they are doing in our state before things happen. And I think that we have received from him and from the Attorney General, Macedo, and from the Public Security Secretary, Gertz Manero, the absolute confirmation on that. They have assigned to Baja California the Assistant Attorney General, which was Mr. Fox's Attorney General in Guanajuato, a gentleman by the last name of Camarena. And we will be working with him. In fact, we have started to form a team. We formed a team which worked last week on our initiatives, which we want to present to the state legislature. And we want to get them involved, and they are very much involved and in agreement. They have made some changes. And in fact, they are going through the same problem that I have to go through in cleaning up the state police, for example. They are doing it in the federal level. They received 1,400 federal agents only for all of Mexico in December 2000. And they couldn't speak well of any of them. So they're going through this transition. That's why we have to work together. I think we will advance very much in that. Because again, we will work based on trust. And that's what I told the president. What you achieved with Mr. Bush, which is very, very good. This trust has never been between the two presidents of both our countries before. I feel that from what I have talked to federal authorities in California, I feel that we are now in a different mode. They have received indications, instructions to work with us, and Mr. Fox has authorized, also Mr. Macedo, that we will be able to deal directly with FBI, for example, with the other authorities, the Attorney General's office here in San Diego, etc. So we will start doing our responsibility at the state level, and I feel that we will work closely. I just had a meeting on Monday with Mr. Morales. ¿Cómo se llama? El de la oficina de Davis. Michael Flores. And he was there for the state-to-state address of Mr. González Alcocer. And obviously I invited Governor Davis to come down there. I met him when he was chief of staff with Governor Brown some 20 years ago, more or less. So we will be able to work together. I think he has a very, very good image and feeling towards us, and vice versa. So I think we'll do look, and I will continue working with this with this civic group of San Diego Dialogue, for example, and obviously with the Institute here because of our close friends here. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments today. I'm just wondering if you can, I have a question for you about the PAN in Baja California. How much growth has the PAN experienced in Baja California since Fox's election, just in terms of the number of members who have solicited membership, or the number of people who have solicited memberships? And what kind of challenges has that presented for the PAN as an organization in Baja California?
The growth came since 1989, when we won the state government, the city of Tijuana, the city of Ensenada, and with those victories, there were people coming in, because during the '89 state campaign, there was a strong movement of citizens supporting and protecting the election, a democratic army, we called it. So many of those people came into PAN, especially through Tijuana. Okay, when we won in '95, after we had won a couple of elections before but not recognized, when I went into office in '95, the Mexicali PAN member list also increased. This is logical. You have a party in power, obviously. People see opportunities, and we must always be careful to not have people in there only because of working opportunities. There must be a mystical and a moral foundation for their place in the party. So I think that after the election of July 2nd, there has been a normal flow of people. Nothing really as big, because this has been accumulating in the last 10 years. Mexicali, for example, had about 600 members before '95. Now we have about close to around, officially around maybe 2,000. We're very close to Tijuana and growing, because we have in the process of being admitted as members, they have to be 1 year as associates. We have in the whole state right now about, let's say, 5,200 members, but more than 4,000 additionally in the process of becoming members.
Thank you.
Buenas tardes. I was interested in your remarks about cooperation and integration between California and Baja California, but I was wondering if you could talk about your ideas and strategies for education. Or just to give a couple examples, I think you may remember at the K through 12 level, there used to be a San Diego Tijuana history fair, which ran out of money, I think. We have teaching and research cooperation between California State University and UC with UABC and CETIS and COLEF. But the main CSU Education Abroad program is actually in Querétaro at Monterey Tech's campus. It seems to me that we're kind of missing an opportunity here. And I know that there are programs in place. There's a Border Fulbright program. We also have barriers like Feinstein's proposal to ban foreign students for the next 6 months. And you know, obviously there are problems, but where would you like to go with this?
Well, educational system in our state has to be brought up to the reality of these years. We will start to present an educational project, hopefully by January, which will turn around the objectives. Instead of concentrating on the teacher, we will now concentrate on the child in the classroom. We want to obviously maintain full coverage at the primary levels and in the secundarias, which would be equivalent to your high schools. We must increase it and have it by the third year of our government at 100%. We also have to increase our coverage at the preparatoria, how would you call it? Here in high school, part of high school, because we do have more people demanding to study. Now, we will establish a scholarship fund outside the government run by citizens to provide scholarships to anybody whose economic conditions justify it, so that he or she can continue studying and get a professional degree. We will reinforce the programs linking the business sector with our educational system. We want to bring in English and computing into the primary level from the very first few years, and be able to get that going because of its importance. Now, these are some of the things that I can tell you because of lack of time, but we want to really get into more agreements here in the area in two aspects. First, the technical schools. We have had a couple of meetings with Mr. Augie Gallego here, and we want to formalize that more. We have seen in the San Diego Dialogue, for example, the Forum Fronterizo last year, a study that was made of your local high school here, and some of the problems, interesting, were the same ones we have, some of them. Very, 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 very good, because that way we can work together on solving some of these situations and get our knowledge. So I think we can apply what we get together on a binational level to both sides of the fence. I think it will work. So we'll go on that and emphasize again the technical preparedness of our students. We have to get them prepared so they can be able to understand this high technology, these companies that we have in Baja and ones that are coming over there. We'll just be inaugurating probably next month a huge investment of $500 million of this huge conglomerate of France, Thomson, which used to be, which bought RCA Victor, et cetera, et cetera. We just had Tuesday the visit of Toyota. They will set up a manufacturing operation in Baja California in the next 2 years and go up to maybe 250, 300,000 vehicles produced, probably in Mexicali. So this will bring us together very closely, which is obviously what we have been seeing and talking about in this San Diego dialogue and in the Forum Fronterizo.
I'm going to ask Fred Chrisman to bear with me for just a moment. I'd like to have you answer a question about migration policy, especially Mexico's migration policy. The fact is that the Baja California section of the U.S.-Mexico border is now the most lethal segment of that border. So far this year, 324 undocumented migrants have died trying to cross into the United States, of whom at least 111 died in the mountains and deserts stretching from Baja California into the United States. Under your government, what will the strategy of Baja California be to increase migrant protections and reduce this steadily mounting death toll, which is a direct consequence of the current U.S. strategy of border enforcement?
Yes, unfortunately, Wayne, in fact, the part in front of Mexicali has been the largest concentration now because of this Operación Guardián, which has been moving the migrants to the mountains and now into the deserts. And we have these unfortunate, very unfortunate, tragic statistics. We have, as you know, operating 3 beta groups. I have asked them, I have asked the Secretary of Gobernación, Santiago Krill, to review the human quality of the integration of these groups, especially at the leadership level. We have, unfortunately, corruption there, strong corruption. The migrants have produced, without their, obviously, intention, a mafia of people which are accumulating large amounts of money. You've probably read how much it costs a migrant to cross over into the U.S. So this must be looked at in a different angle. Now, we were also happy to see Mr. Macedo and Mr. Ashcroft some months ago in the Mexicali-Calexico border with a program that the U.S. will started to implement to give some protection with some liquids and some food in different points of the routes. We want to do a much better job, obviously, of preventing this migration by getting our economy going better. But as a state government, what we will continue to do much more is to be really very close to the attention of these people. In what aspect? Number one, doing our best for them to stay in our state. Advising much more of the possibility of employment and housing and education for them and their children. We must do a much better job in that. Now, if they decide to intent and cross over into the U.S., we have to work much more with the U.S. authorities also because of obtaining always a consistent human dignity treatment to the migrants. We also want to make sure that the return of these people, because it's a continuous two-way flow, at least when they come back to us from the U.S. authorities, again, do our best to look after them, increase our presence as state governments in the social organizations that are in place in Mexicali, Tijuana, primarily, to be able to expand their coverage of treatment and housing temporarily of these people. But we want to do our best again to have them definitely stay in our state. We must also provide, and we will look much more in the health situation of having them be looked at by our state authorities once we have identified them. But again, Wayne, what really bothers me very much is when I fly from Mexico City to Mexicali on the 8 o'clock flight out of Mexico City, there's always our migrants' presence, maybe 20 to 30 undoubtedly, every one of those flights every day. When they arrive in Mexicali, I see how the pollero, how do you call it here in the States? Smuggler. The smuggler has signs, hand signs, face signs with the federal authorities that tells them there's a group from me, don't hassle them, let them pass through. And they have the vans outside the Mexicali airport at night. It's around 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night when that flight comes in. And they are very, very organized, you know. So they bring him into the vans and they take him to the safe houses. And that's the other part that we must look at. This I expressed to President Fox on Friday and to Secretary Krill, Santiago Krill, that we must be much more aggressive in cleaning up the situation because what is happening is what you have seen. The smuggler is never caught. Maybe the guide, if he has the responsibility, human responsibility to stay with the group. But most of the time, you know, they are being left out in the desert, in nowhere land for them. And maybe the guide is picked up. But the real smuggler, the head smuggler, is never caught. So these organizations are entrenched in corruption with our federal people. So we have this new government of Fox facing this tremendous problem of human qualities. You know, there's a necessity to create a new human infrastructure in our federal government, and it will not be fast. I don't think it won't be easy also, but we must endeavor to work with the federal government, our state authorities, and we will set up an intelligence service to provide information specifically on corrupt officials. And I've asked Mr. Fox, please, if we bring you information, act on it, believe us, and get these people put in jail. I mean, and really put in jail. We must make very strict examples, very clear examples that this cannot be tolerated. They are killing people. They are really handing these people to smugglers, which are making these people go across because of their tremendous anxiety to cross to a better life. They are willing, in fact, without even, let's say, they think about it, but they're dying. They're being sent to death with the temperatures of 120 degrees or more in the deserts, or the freezing cold coming in the next few months, Wayne. So we must do a much better job in cleaning up this corrupt situation.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to hear what your vision is for the region and for the two countries. Wayne, of course, anticipated the substantive aspects of my comments having to do, or question having to do with immigration. although your response deepened my concern. First of all, your use of the term illegal immigration or illegal immigrants is the language, of course, of the U.S., who is seeking to criminalize a process that's been going on, as you know, at least as well as I do, for 100 or more years. And in the process of criminalizing that activity, we, us Americans that demand the services of undocumented migrants from Mexico, have created a pattern and practice very much like the activity that we created with our demand for drugs. And I'm disturbed and concerned that you might think that law enforcement and that a process of further criminalization of this activity of binational migration is the solution. It's my belief that that will only increase the cost of crossing the border, that hundreds of thousands will continue to do so each year, and that what you will be doing is just perpetuating a problem that was created and is mainly generated here on this side of the border. So I'm hoping that you'll reconsider your use of the word illegal immigrant, and that you'll consider alternatives to further criminalization of an activity that the United States depends upon on the one hand, and yet punishes severely on the other. Thank you.
Yes, I agree with you. The correct word should be undocumented migrants, and I agree that we should not have used that term. Maybe it's just a running over of so many lectures or readings of things related to this problem. And again, I accept your suggestion very, very happily. Number two, when I was referring to the enforcement, I was referring here to the corrupt officials that are promoting this smuggling. What I'm trying to say is that these people are taking money from these very hungry people. That I don't think should be tolerated. What I do not want you to understand is that we will not do anything to castigate the migrants. Obviously, that they are in their very complete human rights to seek a better life wherever they want. That is my point of view. Obviously, there are laws, there are borders, etc. Well, that's a job that must be done. But again, I will not put in jail anybody for trying to cross into the United States. I want to be very, very clear about that. But I will go after these officials that are taking $1,000, $2,000 per head with the smuggler to lead them to death. We must be able to provide for our own in our own country. Obviously, I think that's in the long term. In the meanwhile, we must do our best to have these people protected. What I mean is protect their lives, protect them from death. Not stop them. I want to make sure, not stop them. I hope I am clear. And again, I thank you for your suggestion, and very well accepted.
What does the PRI need, or excuse me, the PAN need to achieve to improve its chances of winning the next presidential election in 5 years?
They have to do a very good job. It's very simple said, but Mexicans are looking with very high hopes, and obviously it's very understandable when you have a new government, a government from a new party coming to office like we had in '89 in Baja and now all of Mexico last year. Everybody has very high hopes. Again, much higher than reality can justify. And sometimes, obviously, candidates may go a little bit overboard in their pronouncements during the campaign. But primarily is that we must face the reality of this human structure that we have inherited from the previous governments of PRI at the national level. Some very, very few examples. The state, the Federal Senate, its president, when they went into office on September 1st of last year, 3 months before Fox, the new federal Congress, the Senate president had at his disposal 62 people and 36 vehicles. None of the vehicles were found, and of the 62 people, 56 were just, as we say, flyers in the payroll. They didn't even work there. So we're faced with a change in which will take this 6 years and more. But again, we are also have to be much more effective in being less, thinking a little bit less about our actions and doing things, even though we might not hit the bullseye. People are waiting for our results. And again, the answer is we must, as a PON-originated government, do a very good job to have them elect us again. We will have the advantage that the perception at the national level of PON, which is what we felt in the election of Baja California on July 8th, was that PON is perceived as an honest party. Still, we have not done ourselves enough damage yet to change that, and we will obviously very, very careful not to do it, not to achieve this objective of damaging ourselves. But again, PON will be always an important factor whenever new candidates are presented. We will have our first test on July of 2003, because the full House, the Mexican House of Representatives, will be up for election in 2003. So that will be a good test for the national feeling towards Fox and its government.
Good afternoon, Governor-elect and panel. My question is, could you provide us an update on your economic plans for redevelopment, housing, commercial redevelopment, and what kind of budget do you foresee in Baja?
We have a group of housing promoters, housing developers, better, of Baja California and of national, at the national level, working in Baja with a small group to present a housing project which we will consent with the new Commissioner on Housing, Mr. Mulas, that was just recently designated at the presidential level. And we want to consent this new housing project, which looks into, for example, making our initial housing entry-level houses bigger. Currently, they're around 40 square meters, which is not very much. I have requested that they look at the possibility of at least 80 to 90 square meters and in a plot of land of 120 square meters. Currently, the plots of land are around 60 to 80 square meters. So we will then fortify the housing project with funds at the federal level, like we have with FOBI, which gives us the possibility of attending the low-income employees. And then we will also be working with the national banking system and Infonavit, which is now, as you know, lending up to 30 years for housing in Mexico, fortunately. But what we have to do is get a housing project in consensus with the federal government. That's my principal worry, so we can work in synchronization with them. The housing developers are there. The demand is very, very high. We need to build next year at least in Baja 60 to 70,000 houses, for example. Right now it's going to be this year 22,000, so you must see the challenge that we have ahead. But I think that the only thing you can change, I think, is the sense of gravity and that you're going to die one day, because everything else you can change. Okay?
¿Puedo hacer una pregunta, Wayne?
Give me just a minute here. This is actually at the request of our missing commentator, Peter Ward, who sent me a list of 5 burning questions that he would like to have you answer. I'm going to pick only one, and I'll read it verbatim from Peter's email. This is really a question about the political culture of Baja California. Given the relative recency of the state's creation and its mixed ethnic composition historically, and the importance of migration streams coming from all over Mexico and from Oaxaca in particular, how do you propose to forge a sense of statehood? What can you do to anchor people psychologically and create a real sense of being Baja Californiense?
Well, I congratulate my friend Peter. It's a very good question. That's why I miss him, notwithstanding our great company here, Mr. Shirk, Professor Shirk. What can we say about that? When you go and you walk the hills of Tijuana, for example, you see Mexico's map in your face. You see it facing you. You have Guerrero, you have Tabasco, Chiapas, Jalisco, etc., Veracruz. You go into the assembly lines and you have this exquisite, I think it's fabulous, this mosaic of Mexico. In each of these faces, you see the tremendous desire to live better. That is something so valuable that we are very happy in Baja that we have this. That's why I say, welcome all the migrants. Let them come. And in fact, you as academics must know that in the next 25 years, I think 40% of our population in Mexico will be on the northern border. That's what we have been told from studies made in Mexico City by different institutes. So welcome these migrants. Now, in relation to Peter's question, I think that another thing that they feel is that they maintain their roots to their origins. In fact, many of them go back in December and come back in mid-January. That's why the high absenteeism in the factories, January 1st, or 2nd, I'm sorry. But also, they have a sense of belonging to Baja California in the sense that this has been the land that has made their hopes turn into reality. And when you talk to them, they have a sense of protecting what they have achieved. And we will go into that area and tell them, why don't we do more things so that you will be able to have more activity to protect? Why don't you work with us so we can build more parks and, for example, get our families more integrated, getting them to be able to take care more of their children? Why don't we work around aspects of Mexican historical family life, and also the importance of another thing? We must endeavor, relating to the question of the gentleman over there, housing. Housing are the roots. For Mexico, for Mexicans, a house is the sign of success, is a sign of belonging, is the sign of it's their fortress, in other words. And we must provide housing so we will be able to get them more rooted in our state. And whenever people have had houses, been able to purchase houses, etc., you see them as an example of their origins, of the state that they came from, but also you see them that they are always endeavoring to do something to better it. And this is something, and you pave the streets in front of their houses, and automatically they pave the sidewalk. They cement the sidewalk, and they put fences, and they paint the fences with white, and they grow a garden, etc. That's how we will do our best to get them rooted into. But always respecting the origins. We must always protect that because it's something that must never be erased, I think.
Buenas tardes, señor gobernador. Quería consultar qué política o qué relación mantiene el PAN con las comunidades mexicanas en el exterior. Particularmente, usted como un activista del partido, ¿qué relación tienen ustedes con la comunidad mexicana en California? ¿Cuál programa, qué ideas tienen como partido, no como gobierno?
The gentleman asked, what are our relations as a party with the Mexican American community here, particularly in California? I have to say, unfortunately, very little. I had the opportunity to be international secretary for PON's executive committee maybe 18 years ago, something like that, when I first met Wayne. And what we did first is to be able to tell them that there was an institution called PON first. They thought it was only bread here in the U.S. And I spent maybe close to 4 years traveling in different visits to institutes. Obviously, I started here in our own backyard with this institute way back then. So but we must continue and amplify this. What we will do is with the new configuration of our National Executive Committee with next month's changes, one of the efforts will be into the Mexican American community as a party. Now, as a government in Baja California, we will go and work with Juan Hernandez from Mr. Fox's office and tie our institutions like his government, our government, into the Mexican American community in the different areas. In California, which is the one in front of us, and be working also because we will be setting up offices which will promote the sale of our products in different cities in the U.S., Europe, and Asia. And particularly in the U.S., we will work with Juan Hernandez also again to be able to link up, because in a very short span of time, the Mexican population, which has a green card, but still is a Mexican citizen, for example, even though they have a green card, they're an immigrant, legal immigrant, I would say, and I hope that's correct, they will be able to vote in our elections. That was almost achieved for last year's election. So these people have received, I don't know if you saw, some months ago Mr. Fox made a tour of Mexican communities. And the results were very, very good, because what they want to do is they want to know more about what is happening in their country. And that's why this office of Juan Hernandez is very important, and they're getting very good support, in fact, from very successful Mexicans, in fact, that are in the media world, etc., to be able to link up more with their origins. As you know, our communities are very introverted. They stay within themselves very much, and very little outside. They are now stepping more and more and more outside, as you saw in last year's your federal elections here, in the U.S. So I think that we will, salud, we will work that way with the federal level and our state government into that. And the PON will open up an avenue of linkage with them also.
Hi, everyone. One question. During these last elections, the ones in which, state elections, the ones in which you participated, many people who were registered to vote that day did not show up to vote. So I think this signals something. This gives us a kind of a message. And my question is, why this did happen, and what would be your strategies to try to recover the lost confidence of the citizens, perhaps in the government?
Yes, we only had a 38% turnout on July 8th. Very, very low. Very worrisome. There has been an analysis done by with some participation of some academics, friends of the Institute here, for example, like Tonatiuh Guillen, etc., that you know, at the COLEF, and also some academics of different institutions in the Tijuana area. And there was a study just made recently, came out in August, in the end of August. And, for example, they came up with some observations. The voter lists, because of the huge migration in Baja California, must be, as we say, maybe, I don't know if the correct word is actualizada. It must be updated, yes. Because people that come to Baja California immediately seek the voting credential, which, as you know, Baja had the first voting credential with a picture. Mr. Woofer promoted that in 1992 and 91, I'm sorry. And they want that as an ID. But some of those migrants stay in Baja for a short span of time and they go back. They didn't like the place, they didn't fit or whatever. But this has not been updated. So we have a large amount. Some people say maybe 30% of the voting list is not updated. It's legal. The voting list is legal. The person exists, but does not live anymore in Baja. So they must update that. Another thing is that the voter has become sometimes, they say, tired because in Baja we have state or federal elections 2 out of every 3 years. We have one last year, one this year. In 2003, we'll have a federal election, midterm. Then in 2004, the midterm state election. And then we'll have another free year. So in other words, in the next 6 years, there will only be 2 free years of no elections, 2002, 2005. We will, in fact, look at the idea of promoting to put these state elections at the same time as the federal elections. Even though it could cost me a year of my term, I think that it is important that we not have this amount of elections, which in fact hurts the operation of government because they receive the pressures of an electoral process. So I think that there's a reason for that, they say also. The intense use of mass media has somehow distanced the voter from other candidates, from the other candidates. Sometimes the voter is disenchanted because some parties and candidates have lowered the level of their campaigns using only negative attacks, negative media to try to gain votes. Whatever the reason is, we have a little time to pinpoint it and develop a quick solution, but we must work in the different avenues. And also, there must be an effort to really analyze the authorization of parties. We had 8 parties competing in July of this year. 8 governor candidates, 8 mayors for each city, etc. Slates, the congressional majority districts are 16. So we had 16 times 8 for Congress. So this also is something that we must look at. Should we have requirements a little bit more strict? There seems to be sometimes only parties. In fact, one in Mexico is really a family party, and another one is operated by family and cousins or whatever. And should they be that way? I mean, that's a question that must be analyzed. I don't want to be put on tape here and saying that we don't want any more parties, only PAN or whatever. No. What we want is really, does the voter feel that there should be so many parties? Or how should parties be authorized? people are sometimes feel difficulties in believing in parties, in political parties in Mexico. We have obviously a credibility question, as the institution of government in general has a credibility problem there also. We have a gap there we must do our best efforts to eliminate. So that's what I could tell you about this abstentionism that we had in July.
And when you solve that problem, please don't hesitate to share the solution with us. This is actually, any of you shopping for a doctoral dissertation, I regularly advocate the systematic study of non-voting in Mexico. It's an area where we really don't have any scientific literature. So that's something that I'm promoting as a personal crusade, and we hope that we will have some useful data to illuminate this problem more fully for you in Baja. We're out of time now. Let me just say that it's been a real honor and a pleasure to have Governor-elect Elorduy here, particularly at this historical juncture before he's even taken office. You have fully lived up to your reputation for candor and directness, and we really look forward to having frequent interactions between the scholars of the Center for U.S.-Mexican Studies and the officials of your administration over the next 6 years. We'd like to invite all of you who can to stay around for the usual post-seminar reception, refreshments in the lounge of the main building right across the plaza. Thank you so much again to our main speaker and to our panelist, David Shirk.